around how strong the challenges are that we're dealing with, right? This isn't the stuff that we're dealing with and the type of positive change we're trying to make. This isn't amateur stuff. This isn't for the faint-hearted. This isn't for rookies, right? This is a gathering of experts. And that's why we're here, hoping to learn from each other and support each other. What we'd like to do now is ask each of the working groups to give us a report back. We're going to set your time limits to 5 minutes. Focus, if you can, please, on the areas that were outlined as questions for the groups around challenges and successes, transforming opposition, building alliances, but also please reflect on how the conversation unfolded naturally and organically, and we'll work with that. Is Gary, have we got Gary? Gary, is Gary here? Okay. We're going to ask each group to limit their report back to 5 minutes, and I'll give you sort of a cue when you've got 1 minute left. What's going to happen is, as you give these report backs, Ivy and I are going to pay attention to what is beginning to appear as dominant trends, where we're seeing areas that are looking for urgent attention, where we're seeing areas that consistently are calling for a different strategy or approach, and areas where we may need some new information or research. So we can begin to identify those gaps, because identifying those trends and the pieces that are missing, those parts of the puzzle, can make a real difference in reconfiguring our strategy to have a different outcome. Now, why don't we do a little what our friends in North Africa call zenga zenga, right? We won't go in order, we'll skip around. Could I ask the people who were in the Investing in Girls, Group D, to please send up their rapporteur? Dr. Ogden, are you? Please, come on up. If you have flip chart, we can paste it here for you. If you don't, we're happy to take your oral testimony. Would you like to come up here and then... Whatever you prefer.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Amelia. I'm representing the discussion on investing in girls, facilitated by YB Teo Ni Ching and Dr. Vanessa. So we've had a lot of things discussed, but I'm going to prioritize a few since, time limitation. So the first one that we talked about was on leadership, inculcating leadership skills amongst girls. So some of the issues that we identified are about stereotypes. So these are two ways, because some of the stereotypes are already internalized by these girls themselves. So for example, when they go to school, they do well, they go to universities, they do well, they get jobs, but a lot of the girls, and eventually when they grow up and become women, they feel like their options are limited. It's always about, what do I do after this? Or is marriage the be-all and end-all? And this is especially even more so in rural areas where they feel like marriage is the idea that, or the destination that I'm going towards. So what have been done that was shared by some of the members in the discussion is to teach teachers and counselors, to train them, to make them more equipped to talk to these girls and be a more effective support system to them. So we also talked about how teachers and counselors need to be equipped with gender sensitization training and things like that. So that's the first one. The second one is about, let me look through my notes. Okay. Stateless children and child marriage. I'm just going to talk about them together. So child marriage is an issue, and a lot of people agreed. And stateless children, and it was clarified by YB that the recent thing that was talked about in Malaysia is stateless children are only allowed to access education if one of the parents is Malaysian. So we still have a lacuna in terms of stateless children where both of the parents are non-Malaysians. So this group of people still cannot access the education system because it's easier to convince Malaysians to allow stateless children to go to our schools, to go to our public schools when we can tell them, oh, one of their parents is Malaysian. We also had a mini discussion on this where we were wondering if there's a delineation between if the Malaysian parent is the father or if the Malaysian parent is the mother. So we were wondering if the Malaysian parent is a father, would that be easier for that kid to go to school versus if that Malaysian parent is the mother. So on child marriage, we talked about going into schools and teaching these kids about options and things like that. But it was also pointed out that it's not like these girls are not doing well in school, right? Like in Malaysia, that's not a problem. We talked about the difference between enrollment of girls in school versus their actual attendance. So is there a difference between, well, we know that girls do enroll in school, but do they actually go to school on a day-to-day basis? And some of the suggestions that we had in relation to this include consultation, we talked about mentoring, we talked about providing internship opportunities. An interesting one is providing budget for girls' education and also creating an academy for girls' leadership. So to sort of like help, I guess, train them to become leaders or provide them or impart them with the necessary skills to do that. We had a question that was interesting when it comes to creating this exclusive space in schools for girls, where someone asked the question of, so okay, it's great that we have an academy exclusively for girls, but would that impact their ability to go out later on and compete with boys in the real world? So okay, they have this safe space when they're growing up, but when they go out in the real, job market and things like that, would they feel small, or would they not be used to maybe the more aggressive or the different types of people and the way they talk and things like that? It was so Dr. Vanessa shared that. Well, okay, they may go to schools. They may go to schools that are exclusively for girls, but we should allow them opportunities to go out and still compete with other students from other universities and boys, and this will help train them to be able to compete with anyone basically. Don't mean to be binary in the way I refer to these children, by the way. Anyway, so we also talked about traditional roles. We talked about information gap. We talked about stereotyping and optics. So this is going back to the first one. Also because how are we telling our girls to look at themselves? Because when we open school books, how do women and girls are portrayed in the textbooks? And how are they, when they go to schools on a day-to-day basis, during assembly, how are girls and these traditional roles being, how do people speak and teach them about these roles in schools also matter? So some other suggestions that we talked about include things like, hold on. So there was also a discussion about leveraging on things like competitive parenting. So because some parents might feel like, okay, I should prioritize boys in certain education or in soft skills training. So we can show them like, hey, look at this 13-year-old girl and she's doing really well. So maybe parents will feel like, I want my girl to be like that too. So it is like, invoking the competitiveness and parenting. We also spoke about, lastly, how do we, about showing role models, show and tell. This is what I was talking about. So shows, successful girls and things like that. And lastly, an interesting thing that was shared is also by our friend from Ghana, which said that there was a nationwide campaign involving like TV, radio stations, and media where they create interesting jingles about sending girls to school, and that somehow created the awareness and things like that. So I thought that was very interesting, so I'm just sharing that. So generally we talked about stereotypes internally and externally. We also talked about the actual structural barriers that girls face. We talked about role of parents and role of teachers and role of schools, and those were the ways that we thought that would help address these issues. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Next, could we please hear from 2B, Changing Law?
sure how. Oh, very good.
Somebody can hold it up for you. I'll put it up there.
Yeah, I've got some tape. Take it up here if you want to refer to it. I don't know if folks can see it, but lovely.
There's more notes for yourself.
I like visuals. Is it sticking, or do you want a wee bit of tape?
But guys, this is so fantastic. Did I think I'll ever be here in Parliament? No. And this is such an exciting moment.
Then you should have a mic so you can take control.
Okay, and so from an affected foreign spouse to one who champions the cause, of course, that's what I went into the group that was law and policy change. Our facilitators were Bangui and Mr. Najib. So, well, let me just qualify this. This is Hanitan's conceptual framework of changing the law and policy. So we had this big, huge triangle, and you can't see it, but it says substance, structural issues, and content, okay? And it's quite fancy, but to break it down, we said that, and it was a fantastic group because the group comprised of lawmakers, CSOs, I think there were some academicians, so it was an interesting conversation. So the first thing was the different types of laws. We didn't want to take any one law, but we had many laws there, like the Islamic family law. Well, let me just say, first on top of it all, we said there should be gender equal legislation, or should there be a law which is for non-discrimination. So it covers all the areas of equality. And then under that we had Islamic family law, but we also had a delegate from Sri Lanka. So she said, hey, can you all just include religious laws, okay? And then we had decriminalizing laws, such as questioning the fatwas. We also discussed native laws, customary laws, citizenship and domicile. And I'll explain all this in a moment. We talked about removing outdated penal codes, such as crime of enticing a man's wife, and also spoke about sex against the order of nature with consent and whipping. Okay, so some of these things we said were pretty much outdated. Some needed to be changed, basically because they perhaps were came into effect sometime way before independence. Okay, so then we came to structural. Let's go into context. These laws are somewhat patriarchal. The interpretation of the religious laws are dependent on people. There's the customary native laws. So even though this was the discussion we had, even though there may be a minimum age of 18 for marriage, but in the rural areas, the indigenous people would get married earlier, and they said, but that's our law. So what is needed, we will cover in the structural side. Also, under the interpretation of the laws, we have the Sharia, the fiqh, and the state laws. So there's this whole multitude of different contexts of the laws. And then we come down to structural, and I hope this sounds a little bit positive. Yes, this was the positive part, because when we were discussing all this, we were wondering, is there hope? But there is. So we come down to, we said that we need a budget, a nice big budget that would help us to provide for legal awareness, training, not just MPs, state assembly people, senators, and their constituents. Okay, and why is that? Because we want a buy-in for all the laws. We want a buy-in for all the change that's going to take place. Okay, so we want people to be growing in knowledge, at the same time to be prepared for the change. So also with the government, the civil service, they have to have gender sensitization. They can't come up with laws, the various different types of laws. There are some laws which actually discriminate against women. Then we have who are the allies? Who's going to help us through all this? So we have MPs, and we actually had Tunisia giving us such fabulous examples. He said how polygamy was actually eradicated, banned. I'm running out of time? Okay. And then we also have, what was suggested is increasing the number of parliamentary sittings so that there's meaningful debate on policy matters, not asking questions on data, because data should be given to us. Right? Data we should have access. CSOs, parliamentarians, policymakers should just be writing in and getting the data. So, so that MPs will be engaged in more meaningful debate. Okay, and the implementation, just coming to the end, it's all the stakeholders working together. And who are the stakeholders? You, me, policymakers, citizens. It's the buy-in, everyone working together so that we can effect policy change. But one good thing, this coming session onwards, there are parliamentary select committees for gender equality, for rights. I'm really glad there's one for Home Ministry so we can actually put forward some of the difficulties we face. And here's, for all of us expecting real good things to happen and engage in terms of women's rights and rights against non-discrimination. So there'll be more equality, more progressive policies. Thank you. I hope that made sense.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's quite a legislative agenda. We should make you speaker. I agree. Okay, let's go with All Politics is Local. Yeah, would you mind coming down, Maybe? It's nice to have.
For our foreign guest, YP Nancy Shukri was the former Minister of Law.
Well, thank you. Are you the one preparing for us, Isam? Yeah, I don't have the notes at all. So I thought I would be talking just offhand. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh my God, this is so small.
I'll make you bigger.
Please. Anyway, just while waiting for him, I'd like to thank my group for having confidence in me to deliver this. I came a little bit late, but I'd like to appreciate especially our core chairman, Elizabeth, and also Nurul Izzah. I don't know where she is now. Okay, everyone is here, and all the group members. Thank you, all of you. Everybody have been very active, and thank you for preparing this for me. Anyway, the title is on. Okay, yes, even. All right. First of all, when we first started, we all just introduced ourselves and asked, how did you get involved in politics? And though not everybody was a politician, but we had a very balanced group. We had politicians, we had we had NGO activists, we had, and we even had people from Sarawak, from Sabah, and a very interesting combination of, well, also some consultants there. They want to be recognized as well. Of course, in gender equality, you have to recognize everyone. And the question was, what made you join politics? So, of course, Elizabeth shared with us on how she became a politician, and after a few experience, though some are not very nice experience, but she made it. And then, of course, I was also asked. I never wanted to be a politician. I thought I was just there as a woman activist before that. But suddenly, I became a politician. But as I said, women issues and children's issues have always been close to my heart. That's why I'm always there whenever there is women conference. So ladies and some gentlemen here, we also discuss on the key challenges that we faced in creating cause for change. So we were talking about short-term and also long-term. Personally, I felt that in order to bring in the change, to help the women, to me, we need to have the short-term change. That's why we need to address the women's issues. Of course, as politicians, we were talking about being in our own constituencies. We try as much as possible to bring in the change. In short term, we try to bring in economic changes for the women. The main thing is for them to become more independent financially, because as I said, if anything happens to their marriage, at least they are left in a very balanced situation whereby financially they are okay. So they are still confident about themselves and try to bring the family into a very balanced family, because this is something that is always getting the women to become backward, one of them, and also some of them, they become less confident of themselves. There is low self-esteem because they have no money. So that is the short-term change that we try to help them so that they can build their own family. Secondly is to look into the long-term plan for the women. Again, we're talking about education here. In education, the Deputy Minister of Education here, we are not trying to change everything, but it is very important to bring in values. When you talk about gender equality, in order to bring a holistic change in the country or in a nation, we need to have values, being all the positive values to be introduced or being embraced by the people. So we have to train them from young, so that they will always remember that it is important to respect each other. It's always important to make sure that they will consider all sectors or all categories of the people surrounding them in order to make decisions. So when these people go out to work, be they become judges, be they become politicians, they will take into consideration when they enact laws, when they formulate policies. So everything will be taken into consideration, whoever they are. So I've been reminded of the time here. But what matters most was that we must celebrate each other's success. So to me, I would like to urge Malaysia to celebrate a Gender Equality Day, to remember that it is very important to celebrate Gender Equality Day so that we are as one. We are a nation as one, not as women, not as men, but gender equality is very important for us all. Since I do not have my time, and I'm sorry, I didn't read this, I cannot read because without my glasses. So anyway, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everyone, and congratulations for having this session. Thank you.
Okay, will we go with Group 2A, Advancing Women in Positions of Power and Authority? The Revolution in shorthand?
Hi everyone, there are two of us. Neither of us realized that we had to come up here to wrap up our discussion, so surprise.
Yeah, this is how not to do it.
So both of us were listening, but between the two of us, we should manage to cover everything. So our discussion, we had a really good group going. We had the 30% club amongst us. We had people who were for the quota and against the quota. So unfortunately, the discussion largely centered around whether we should implement a 30% quota or not amongst political parties and also in Parliament as well.
Yeah, actually, the discussion was, it was a real discussion. We went around different topics. We started off, in fact, speaking about the careers of our moderators, so that's Margaret Curran, as well as our MP, Rushnara Ali. And we asked them about, how was it for them to get into politics? So I'm looking at my notes, trying to find the thread to that. So essentially, actually, we started off with Rushnara mentioning that, so she was running in a constituency where I believe she was up against George Galloway, and she was campaigning for 3 months, and she was mentioning that the process was really quite brutal. But in that time, she did get a lot of support from different avenues, such as the media training, and she believes that media training is really important to be, if one wants to play a public role. She also developed a circle of support and a network. She also got lots of practical advice in her time. And in speaking to her afterwards, she also interestingly mentioned that when she was selected as MP, she got support from Quarters, or congratulated from Quarters after she got elected, and maybe didn't have as much support beforehand. So that was an interesting takeaway from myself. With Margaret, I've got some quotes here. So Margaret mentioned that, if female politicians are seen to talk about women's issues, then sometimes it can come across as though that's all they're standing for. And so she had an interesting viewpoint, which I'm not sure that I agree with, but it was interesting because she said that we need to eliminate that kind of thinking. It's okay to stand for the women's agenda, because if we are part of the women's agenda, actually we're talking about all agendas. So it's a very inclusive agenda. I had never really seen it that way, but that was an interesting take. And she also mentioned how very important the allies are. So, for example, in her experience with the Labour Party, she mentioned that when the trade unions joined and there was support that was garnered from them, it also helped to instigate change within the Labour Party, I think. Yeah, and you, Lina, discussed a little bit about the 30% club. So just elaborating a little bit on that. Talking about the 30% club in Malaysia, which is, we were discussing whether or not it was a quota or whether it was an aspirational target, and then we established, in fact, it's an aspirational target, and it's essentially where we would like to see 30% of female representation on the listed companies in Malaysia. One of the interesting things which actually changed my viewpoint. So before, I'm not a person who believes in quotas. I think we should be able to get there on our merit. We just need to look hard enough. Interestingly, Tan Sri Zarina Anwar said that, I kind of quoted, but I probably misquoted a bit, but I think this is the point, that quotas force creativity in identifying novel ways or novel channels in which we can identify pipelines, and in this case to the board. And that's the way so because you're in this really tough position of trying to find 30% women on board, you're going to try really hard and really in creative ways trying to identify women that you wouldn't otherwise have looked for. So that actually opened my mind a little bit to the idea of setting quotas. Anything else you would like to add, Lina?
Yeah, so I think she covered most of it. We ended up with recommendations, so they are about 8 in total. So first is, one of the issues that was brought up with Margaret, because the Labour Party actually, as a party, they decided that they're going to have a 50-50 quota for women candidates. And so one of the questions that came up was, what was actually the women's response to that quota? So one issue that we looked at is women's willingness And so with the Labour Party at that time, they actually had a group of women who actually volunteered to stand. And I think that is crucial when it comes to implementing a quota, to have that pool that is ready and able to fulfill that quota if we do ever implement it. So that's one recommendation, to have a pool of women who are willing to stand up and ready to contest if we do implement the quota. Number two is for women to resist feeling like associating themselves to women's agenda is degrading. So like I mentioned earlier, because Margaret, for example, had to become the champion of the women's quota or the women's agenda, she felt that she was being pigeonholed. So every time she spoke about women's agenda, you know, everyone else would be like, oh, there she goes again. So as women, we also have to resist that and be aware of it, but also be able to resist that pressure to really just shut up about the women's agenda. Thirdly, as mentioned earlier, to provide support, training, leadership for other women. So women helping women. So you see there are two co-rapporteurs here. You know, we're exemplifying it right here. Fourth is the symbolic value of having women stand up and becoming leaders in public, becoming visible and being role models for our younger generation. Fifth is achieving the critical mass of enough women or even men coming on board with the agenda to push forward any changes. Sixth, childcare was also a big issue. Margaret, I think, did mention that she had a child before she became an MP. I may have gotten it wrong, but childcare was actually a big factor in allowing her to stand and become a minister as well. Seventh, political education, especially amongst the young and in schools. And lastly, to legislate change. Amongst us, there are many there are those amongst us who believe that the only way to achieve change is through legislation.
And I think we'd just like to end on the note from a male ally. So we had a male ally in the room, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Fiji, who left us with an example from Fiji where it says that Fiji has 26% of women who are female. And he also said that his tip to us was, make your presence felt. Okay, thank you.
For there. Very good. Understand.
So thank you so much. I think the four groups have presented, and I would just kind of like to say that we have discussed all these issues, all these points, and all these points were covered during our discussions. In our group, our group was chaired by Jenny Lasambang and co-chaired by Bhim Raskar from India. Our group was a very interesting mix. So we had the elected representatives, a local government representative. We had ex-parliamentarian. We had the practitioners. We had lawyers. We had INGO representatives. And then we also had civil society organizations. We also had Her Excellency from the British High Commission. So we had a very interesting mix. Very interesting discussions also came up. In a nutshell, although I would not really go into enlisting the challenges which are already being shared here, I would just straight away go into some of the recommendations that came out of our discussions. And we said that if we have to bring about change in the mindsets, or if we really want to change the belief systems, we have to start very early. We said that we need to target, or we need to really look at the school level, at the early education level. In the schools, we are teaching mathematics, we are teaching geography, history, science, but we don't really necessarily focus on value education or value-based education. So I think all our gender equality, teaching democracy should really start at that early age. So we would have a generation that literally grows up imbibing, internalizing, and understanding these equality issues. We also discuss about a strong role that media plays in bringing about change. Media can be really effective. It can bring in absolutely horrible things, but it can also bring about a lot of positive change. And an example was shared when a popular actress kind of makes very irresponsible statements about women's empowerment and the kind of support systems that a woman needs or why she doesn't really need it. It really has a very detrimental effect on the change that we are trying to bring about. But also, when something like that happens, there's definitely a backlash on it, and it kind of it encourages a debate. It encourages like a discussion across the countries, across the regions, and then we really look at the changes that we are trying to propose, how effective they are, how do we make them effective. The third issue the third recommendation rather that we said was, if we have to bring about or change the mindsets, the existing mindsets in the society, if we are tackling the social beliefs, disbeliefs, we also need to make the communities aware of various options available. And it was a clear example was given, the example of the child marriage, which is still existing in Malaysia. And one of the reasons why probably families get their girls married at an early age, because the girls get pregnant, and that kind of brings a shame on the family. And there was a suggestion that if you make them aware of various options like adoption or even sex education, that would also help in curbing down the child marriages incidences. The other thing we suggested was, we talked about was a role of civil society organizations to encourage women in politics, and they can bring in role models. They can also play the role of mentors for women who want to get into politics. We also spoke about the need for evidence-based advocacy, or the advocacy which is based by some strong research and data available. We also said that it is very important to make the need for legal awareness, which somebody previously also shared, and we kind of reiterate and agree to the same thing, saying that it's important to make women aware about their rights, about various laws, legislations that support women. A very interesting point that was also shared by the Honorable Mayor from Colombo, saying that it's very important to empower women to challenge the sexist remarks, which are often either taken as a very normal thing or something, just say that, oh, anyway, it's okay, I'll just get away with my things. But no, you need to really challenge those sexist remarks so it doesn't really become a norm then. We also said that there is a need for an integrated approach to empower women in politics. The other thing that was suggested was the strategies to empower women. The strategies demanded, the strategies should be really coming from the bottoms-up approach. So it should be really coming from down either the communities, because then they own up these strategies. There were examples shared from my own country, India, whereby we have found that something which is suggested by the women themselves or the communities themselves has been really taken up in a great spirit. But if something is like a provision of all women's assembly, now since that policy came from top down, you don't really see it taking place in its spirit, the way it was envisaged or designed. We also said that there's a need for special allocation of resources or funds for women's activities, the need for gender budgeting, and then auditing the utilization of such resources. The other thing we thought was providing peer-to-peer support would help women come into politics or encourage women politicians. And we thought that struggle sharing workshops would really provide a lot of support to women in politics, and it will also help to identify the strategies. And then we said that we need to encourage women to actively participate into politics, because if you have to change politics, you must join politics. You can't be sitting on the fence and expecting to change it. And then we finally said that social equality, economic equality, and political equality, they go hand in hand. So it has to be really a joint approach from all the sides. I am just going to really conclude with a very small poem, very, very small, just 6 lines. And it says that when any citizen dies, he or she cannot speak, he or she cannot think, and he or she cannot act. But if a citizen cannot speak, cannot think, and cannot act, then the citizenship is dead. So this is the mindset, this is a neutral kind of approach that if the society is taking, we must change it. We must make it active and alive. Thank you.
So very quickly, this was right, very quickly, it's going to be very difficult to sum up everything in one, and it's beginning to look like the Beijing Platform for Action, you know, a laundry list of, but incidentally, I bring up Beijing Platform for Action because it's going to be 25 years next year, and last week when we were at the regional preparatory meeting, a young woman who's 26 years old, 27, said, 25 years ago, if I had the right to education, I wouldn't be here giving you testimony as a domestic worker who was abused, and and all kinds of horrific things happened. 25 years ago, we had an amazing laundry list of recommendations. Let's not wait for another 25 years. For me, I see the 4 C's here, and that is we all want change, we all want reform, but our biggest challenge appears to be obviously the culture. The culture, the challenges in the culture of trying to bring the mindset change. And in order to do that, we have this issue of budgets and allies. We all know all of that. But what I liked, what I heard from everyone here was the sense of support we want to give to each other, and not to forget another big C, not just about change and changing culture and challenging the status quo, but let's not forget to celebrate, our achievements, and to continue celebrate giving our achievements. I know it sounds all very, another C, cheesy, but just wanted to sum it all up to say, we hope that you're taking some of these ideas and recommendations and infusing it into your own work. I mean, that's the idea. There's not one answer for, one solution that fits all.
I just want to comment on how beautifully ambitious all of those reports were and how visionary they were. It was very clear that you understand the complexities of the situation with which we're dealing, the places we are trying to make change. One of my closest friends is from Iraq, and he tells a story about a sultan who ruled a kingdom hundreds of years ago, and he wanted to be known by all the other sultans in the area, all the other chiefs, as the richest sultan. And so he started to charge people a tax as they came into the city walls during the day. And he got richer. And the other sultans, the other kings and tribes leaders around heard, and they said, this guy's getting rich. And he said, it's working. This policy is working. So he started to charge people in the evenings as well when they left, right? Policy's worked, I'm going to double it. So his reputation grew, he became very rich, but he said, now I want all the other sultans in the area to know how powerful I am, how strong I am. And so he told the guards in the mornings, after you get the person to pay the tax, I want you to slap them, right? So now you pay your tax and you get slapped, right? So word soon spreads that this guy's a nutter, right? He's slapping his own people. He says, this policy is working. So now in the evenings, when people are leaving, they pay their tax, they get a slap. So you can imagine the people are starting to suffer. They are looking for a policy change. And finally, after putting up with all of this, they organize a committee, a coalition, to go see the Sultan. And they get an audience with the Sultan. And they go to see the Sultan and they say, Your Excellency, the tax and the slapping, we really can't take anymore. We're standing in the hot sun, waiting in these long lines. It's humiliating. We're getting slapped in front of our children. We need you to do something about it. You need to fix this problem. Do something about it. And the Sultan says, I hear you. I hear you. I will do something about it. So what does he do? He doubles the guards so the lines move faster, right? The moral of the story is, every conversation about policy and politics is a negotiation. And in a negotiation, you ask for something specific. If you don't ask for something clear, concise, and specific, you never know what you're going to get. So among those beautiful agendas, you're going to have to triage them and pick which one you want and what you're going to ask for and how you're going to ask for it in those terms specifically. And the dividends, you may not see them. They may be reaped by the next generation, but that's your job. That's our job. That's what we do. So outsmart the Sultan with those beautiful lists. And we're going to do a little bit of that triage tomorrow. Thank you for your beautiful work. And to close our session today, speaking of visionaries, we would like to have a conversation with two women who have been leaders in a number of important policy areas. Ivy, will I let you introduce your panel?
Very quick introduction. First, can I invite our lovely, our amazing High Commissioner, British High Commissioner, Her Excellency Vicky Treadell, to Malaysia, and of course our YB Kasturi Pato from Batu Kawan. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be asking them some questions, and they're going to talk to each other. We will like Kasturi to respond to some of the questions, some of the responses that Vicky's going to give us, and basically be a conversation just for a few, say about 15 minutes, after which we want to open it to the floor. You also may have some questions too. But to set the stage, I think many of you may know that Her Excellency Vicky has been a High Commissioner in Malaysia for 4 years. That's all. It feels as if you've been here longer, which is nice because we've done so much. And in fact, sadly, she'll be leaving shortly. I mean, leaving meaning she's leaving the country, but will be within the area, you know, within the region. Of course, Kasturi has been our Member of Parliament for how many years now? This is the second term. So there'll be very specific questions around you being an opposition member, and then now you're a backbencher, right? So let's start with you, Vicky. Hope you don't mind. I'm going to drop off all the, you know, the honorifics. I keep forgetting. Basically, because we are sitting in a parliament sitting, and the aim of this workshop has always been that we wanted Parliament, especially the MPs, together with the CSOs, and especially, and I go back to the MPs, that Parliament has to work better when it comes to women's issues, or any issue for that matter. I mean, women's agenda is obviously infused in so many different policy areas. So I want to start by asking, in all your interactions with Parliament in UK and in the region too, you've served in other countries, what are the things that are working when it comes to Parliament, and what we should avoid, especially now that we have a new Parliament with a lot of, you know, semangat, with a lot more, enthusiasm. What do you think is working and not working in your experience in observing this parliamentary?
Well, it's a very difficult question, and I don't think there is a pat, simple answer, because every geography and every culture and every dynamic is different. So what I would say, there's always this debate when we were playing the little exercise outside, make a firm decision, are you going to choose the position to the left or the position to the right? I'm pleased the death penalty one saw the majority of people move in the right direction. I think this really has to be, if I look at the British perspective, how we have increased women in Parliament. Some of it was driven by political parties themselves, a realization that they needed to see more women within their parties as candidates, because if you don't even select women to run, even if they're tough constituencies to win, you will not convert the numbers. So it was mentioned earlier this morning by Margaret that when the Tony Blair government came in, he set, you know, women-only shortlists, and that succeeded in getting a huge wave of new women into Parliament. I didn't particularly like the strapline they came up with for the women, because I thought it played to exactly what this was counter to, the Blair babes. But you know, and I think when I was in India, very much grassroots, women representing their communities, having a voice. And again, the dynamic was different in New Zealand, which was my last job. And if I can sort of answer a different question, it's really this. You have to create the networks. You have to create the lobbying and the advocacy. How you do it and what networks you use, but that ultimately has to be the leverage. And I do think that the media itself has a huge part to play in this. Running the campaigns to inspire people, to create the debate, to create the space for conversations, to tackle things that are perceived taboos. We can't talk about this. Yes, you can. Why not? So I think there is a place for political will and leadership. There is absolutely a place for civil society to be thoroughly engaged. And there is a role for women who have achieved senior positions to understand the responsibility that whether or not they like it, they are role models, and to understand the impact that they have. And that actually, if you have profile, you have a voice, and you should use it. I was telling someone the other day who asked me why I began to take a more active role. When I was younger, I had a view that actually I succeed on merit. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. And I was in a senior job, and I went to the ladies, and I found a junior member of my team crying. And I said to her, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I feel inadequate because you are my boss." And she said, "You're out there, you're busy, you're full of energy, you seem so confident. I don't know how I can ever do that." So, and I tell you this story because it was only at that moment when I realized that just modeling the behaviors was not good enough. Reaching down and helping, mentoring, sponsoring, speaking publicly. Now, this is equally applicable in the agenda that we are here to discuss, which is about women's political participation. And women who are in politics have to speak up, in my opinion. And that, I think, is one of the most powerful things. But it is absolutely clear to me as well, you need men championing this. That's why the stories from Tunisia were so powerful. Religious leaders actually being the force for change, finding the hadith and the interpretations from the Quran to say, actually, this is a place for women in our society. We cannot carve out parts of society that are exclusively male. If we believe in equality, these are the arguments for it. And ultimately, wherever I have been, it is only political will and courage that ultimately delivers real change. And it's not about shying away when the first criticism lands. It's not retreating when the first challenge appears. And people will use every trick in the book. They will claim cultural norms, they will use religion, they will use lack of experience, that women are not made for this. And if you weaken, then you don't progress. And certainly in the UK, you know, we have not arrived yet. We're in a much better place than we were. And that's why you need networks, that's why you need support mechanisms, that is why you need advocacy, that is why you need men engaged, and you need clear role models and champions who are prepared to put themselves out there and to lead the front line.
And including the role models in Parliament, the more senior members of Parliament. So it's more than being a role model. You have to take an interest and mentor too. Thank you for that. Actually, Kasia, I was going to ask you that question also. Do you find that, you know, when you are here for 2 terms, how did you get into politics? Was that there's still no quota system as such, or targets within the DAP, right? So how do you think you arrived here? And why is there still so few women, even within your own political party or even in Parliament?
I think just to clear the point across that DAP has actually amended its party constitution to fix a minimum of 30% quota of women in the top decision-making position, which is in the CEC. So that is something that the party has been committed to. But as far as political participation by women, May 9th actually was the turning point. If you had noticed during our charamas and rallies in the preamble to the election, we actually saw more women coming out to attend these rallies, not just younger women, but middle-aged women, older women coming out, which made me suddenly think, when mothers leave their homes to join rallies before an election, then you know your country is in trouble. Because in the past, it was the men who went for rallies and women just would follow whatever party my husband voted for in the past. It was different. But this time around, we saw a lot more women who came out to listen to what we were offering.
The charamas.
The rallies and gatherings. And that made not just more women come out to vote for women, but more men came out to also support women candidates. So today we also have a state assembly person from Perlis, YB Gunn, who is here with us all the way from the most northern state of the peninsula. And today we have YB Nurin here with us. We have senators here with us as well. We have more women in parliament now than we've ever had in the past. And this is something very, very important. Of course, we have a long way to go. The heckling still continues. The bullying, to some extent, also still goes on. But when women come in bigger numbers and speak on issues that affect everyone, then sometimes the heckling is softer, it reduces. Sometimes it's not so vile as what had happened, we had seen in the past. I remember many of the most senior female elected reps always saying, why can't a woman be home minister? A lot of the problems that we face in the country have a lot of the power to solve these problems is in the hands of the home minister. So if a home minister, if a female is a home minister, then we'd probably be able to settle more things faster in the country than what we're facing today.
Okay, this is the Ministry of Home Affairs that deals with immigration and the police.
And the citizenship.
Yeah. And citizenship too, yes.
Yeah, so I think a lot of parties, particularly in Pakatan Harapan, are very actively, very enthusiastically formulated structures within the party, within women's wing, to go down to the ground, to engage with young women, to engage with housewives, to encourage them to come and be a part of this movement. Not just for change, to be a part of the movement to taste what social justice is, to taste some of the economic pie. If you had come out to vote on May 9th for a change, then you deserve to say, where's my cut of that pie, So we are encouraging more women to come out and to create platforms for them as well. And I agree with Your Excellency, Vicky, that I have my staffs in my office, girls who tell me, I don't know how you do it. And I tell them, I'm only as good as my team. If my team is not good, then I'm not good. So if I don't have all of y'all working together, then I would not be where I am.
And very quickly, do you find that your role as opposition member before, and I remember women's groups always went to you to give you questions and so on, do you find that role, and now as a backbencher, how different is it? Are you having better strategies, better allies? Is there a difference now that you are a backbencher?
Yeah. When Parliament, when we first convened in 2013, I used to sit over there at the back. And sitting over there meant that sometimes a lot of them can't see you. And I'm actually not a very tall person also. So all the odds were against me. So every time I stood up to speak, someone over there would say, who's that talking? Which schoolgirl is this? So so things were different when I was an opposition MP. For example, and this is just about bureaucracy, just to get information, statistics, data, when you submit questions, when you ask officers, and then sometimes you don't get the things that you want. It's better now that you are government, but we're still not there yet. We were just having in our group discussion, sharing that the research department in Parliament really needs a jolt, I think it needs an overhaul, a reform for us to obtain, because the devil is always in the details. So to be able to formulate policies and best practices to share, to pick up best practices from other countries, Malaysianize it according to our culture, our needs, falls a lot on data as well. So it's easier to get data now. It's also very handy when you have ministers, deputy ministers who are females, whom you can also go and speak to about issues. So a lot of issues get resolved when you discuss it internally. A lot of issues come out in the open, which needs the entire cabinet, the entire country to sit up and take note of. So being a government MP has its advantages. And as a backbencher especially, I mean, you still have to keep your government in check and balance, which is my role as a backbencher, even though I'm part of the government.
So Vicky, I want to pick up on what you said about courage. You said you cannot be faint-hearted, that you have to display courage and forge on. But we are in a context, I mean, I'm thinking of Malaysia immediately, that when there is resistance, there's a tendency to go, okay, then we call it strategy, But what is... Can you just share with us some very specific examples where women just forged ahead despite the fact that they could lose their seat, their popularity, and so on? Could you just where was the courage? Give us some examples of courage that you've seen, despite the risking. Because right now we keep saying it's very risky.
That's true, but actually I would look at Malaysia. Indeed, I think YB Nancy has left the room, and following her, Azalina as well, pushing through that first set of domestic violence legislation when there was resistance to it. So Malaysia has these stories, and it's about building upon that. I know that there are women in this room who have done a lot of work on the Equal Rights Act proposal for gender equality. At the moment, it's sort of in limbo, but I think it's about regrouping and pushing that through. And sometimes when you meet resistance, actually it is trying to create the space to explain why this is not a threat, why this is a good thing. If I think about my time in New Zealand, there was a lot of debate around teenage pregnancies. That was an issue with particularly some of the Maori and Pacifica community. And some politicians felt very, very nervous about talking about it because it was more prevalent in particular ethnic groups. But if you pretend that that is not an issue and you don't debate it, and you don't work with those communities, then you're never going to resolve it. So the Ministry for Women had a lot of difficulty in surfacing these issues in the appropriate way to air them and talk about it. So that's another example of taking issues that people think are taboo, you can't talk about publicly, and dealing with it. Now, not anywhere that I have been, but I've been looking at the work of our Department for International Development, and of course our Secretary of State for that department is also our Minister for Women and Equalities. Female genital mutilation was hugely prevalent in African countries, but working with governments, working with civil society, working with religious leaders and men in communities, they have tackled that. And we are seeing the numbers drop and the eradication of that particular practice in sub-Saharan Africa by actually addressing the issues of why people say it's a practice, and by discussing the medical, the health issues, discussing it at a religious level, why are there these perceptions or beliefs, and actually countering them with the right arguments and the right evidence. And that early work with support from the British government was not easy. These are culturally and religiously very sensitive issues, but there's proof if you can remove the stigma of talking about things, you can address issues and you can see real change happen.
Right. But I was also wondering, in terms of our new parliament now, what is the potential, Kasturi, and also Vicky, maybe you can give us some examples of how women MPs, and including men, who've come together across the what is this called, across the line, across the both parties to work towards gender equality. Because I still don't see that happening. It has happened in the past, maybe for a fleeting moment, but most of the times they tend to toe the party line. Do you think there is a new way of working where MPs come together around gender equality issues specifically, I'm talking about gender equality, where they're going to be working together across party lines? And for Vicky, does that happen on a regular basis in other constituencies, other countries? I know for sure in this country it's rarely happened. It has happened maybe, like I said, for a fleeting moment.
Why don't I sort of pick that up and then hand this over to Kasturi? I think it is beginning to happen in Malaysia. One of the very first things I did when I took up this job was to ask to meet the Women's Caucus. And the women came together over lunch, I think. And the agreement over lunch, Chatham House rules, you leave your party hats at the door. Now let's just talk about the experience that Kasturi hinted at of the harassment you have in Parliament being a woman, being belittled because you're a woman, that your opinion has less value than a male politician. And I think every woman from a cross-section of the political parties here actually had consensus, a shared experience. Now there's a commonality there. So women across the House in this Parliament, I think, and most recently when we came to have some of the preparatory meetings for this event, was how can we work with the MPs here to actually deliver this event? The meetings with the new speaker, that if we're serious about women's political participation and engagement, can we deliver a conference like this? And without women from all the political parties here supporting this, we would not be here today, I don't think. So this event itself is testimony to the fact that we can work with all political parties, with the Speaker of the House, to deliver a first of its kind. So, you know, building on today, not just with the female politicians who've participated and supported this, but with civil society groups who are here, other women from different organizations who are here, this engagement has started. And if you can build upon this, we can see a future where actually a much stronger representation, not just in Parliament or the Senate, but actually women being more active for themselves and the policy issues that matter to them, rather than women being active supporting the men to win their particular seats. Actually women trying to influence and shape policy, being political activists. We still need a good opposition for a vibrant democracy.
You can have access to data.
Exactly. And one of the things, you know, we're working to support the Speaker on parliamentary reform is absolutely, again, a point that Kasturi touched on, which to have great MPs, you need a good research service in Parliament with the data, with the analysis, who can equip you with the statistics so that you can make your points, you can underscore them with the evidence for the points that you're arguing. And I think particularly, you know, points that are made earlier about making sure that the facilities and infrastructure here support that. Whether you are an UMNO female MP or your PKR or DAP, you want a creche. Yes. And I think when you begin to collaborate and deliver things like that to change your environment, it will lead to more bipartisan politics on gender issues that, frankly, politics should not get in the way of. And I know it's, you know, a slightly different subject, but if we had not had a bipartisan approach, Britain would not have passed its climate change legislation that transcended the Labour and the Conservative government. And there will be policy issues where, frankly, a different type of politics comes into play. And I think women who tend to listen more, it's a dreadful generalization, who try to find ways to work together. And I've seen this in India, many of our projects, we chose to work with the women because we knew they would deliver. They would think family, my children, looking after the community in a way that the men did not. So that is a real reason for women to work together. And if you work together across the house, you can drive real and lasting change.
I think before, yeah, I think for the first time we have 6 special select committees set up in Parliament, which is one of the efforts on parliamentary reforms and strengthening parliamentary democracy. And these select committees consist of 7 members of Parliament from both sides of the divide, from the government, the opposition, and the independent. So when you have this sort of a participation, and when an issue is addressed, you get multi-pronged even solutions for these issues, and it has never been seen before. Plus, I think it's also a culture here in the Parliament to vote according to party line, which is something the Westminster doesn't have. You vote according to your conscience. So here, if in general your party says, no, we don't really support this, then, you know, your MPs don't vote for it, which is something I hope, you know, it's a double-edged sword, you know, it could work either way. But I think at the end of the day, good policies must be supported, good laws must be supported. When I think it was 2 years back when we debated the amendments to the Domestic Violence Act, there was a particular MP from BN at that time who said deprivation of needs by the husband is also a form of domestic violence, which was a joke because Malaysia rarely makes it to BBC News, and we made it to BBC News for this. And he was a former judge, by the way. So when I met him, he said he was misquoted. I said, the whole Parliament heard you say it. And yeah, so that was, yeah, that's just a side note. But of course, so now we've had our first meeting on the Rights and Gender Equality Select Committee. Our chair is here, the MP for Merbok. So we've actually outlined a few issues that we'd like to address and talk about. One of it being a new bill on sexual harassment, another on gender equality, and also to address the issue of citizenship. But according to what the Deputy Women's Minister said, that the sexual harassment bill is still not complete yet. They still need to finalize an impact study, etc. So that probably will not be tabled in this sitting, but we hope then it will be tabled in the coming sitting, probably in June or July. So, yeah, I think it's becoming healthier now. You have MPs from the opposition also standing up to say, oh, I agree with my my colleague here on this point, etc. It used to be very, very adversarial, combative in the past. And also, I must give credit where it's due. The role of the speaker is very important. Dato' Arif has shown great leadership as far as parliamentary reforms is concerned. The fact that Dato' Arif is participating in programs like this, funded by the Westminster Foundation of Democracy. You know, his speech at the IPA Assembly was just fantastic. You know, how he actually, you know, put it really out there for the ASEAN community that you know, that it was the courage of the Malaysian people that brought about this change, and now work actually starts now, you know, after the change of government. So it's important to have a leader of the House like Dato' Arif, as opposed to the speaker in the past, you know, very partisan and constantly, you know, never taking action against potty-mouthed MPs, you know, when they you know, hurl vulgarities at us. So it is indeed really a
That's
fresh...
great. You're on track.
Yeah.
The culture is
breath of
changing.
fresh air,
I mean,
yes.
we are, of course, obviously as voters, we want to see a non-partisan crossing the aisles, working across the aisles kind of approach, especially when it comes to women's issues, which is a no-brainer. I mean, of course, we need to have a sexual harassment law, right? I want to now open the floor. Open questions to the floor. If anybody would like to ask any kind of questions, we have in front of you, not 2 members of parliament, 1 member of parliament, very experienced opposition, backbencher, and of course, Vicky has been very, very instrumental in looking at women's networks and pushing for gender equality, not only in Malaysia, but in the region too, to play that kind of supportive role, if not even to stimulate that kind of conversation. Any questions from anyone? A roving mic. Okay. I don't need a roving mic. There are mics in front. Thank you. Sorry. Please, yes, sir. The gentleman over there first.
Shall I?
Can I have a show of hands first? 1, 2, and Honey 3. Okay. And 4 from Firdaus. Let's start with from our right. Yes. Yes, you just press the, can someone please help her? Just press the, brilliant.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yes,
okay.
yes, we can hear you.
My name is Anna Makau Mutelo. I'm the High Commissioner of Namibia to Malaysia. I just wanted to say thank you to my sister and colleague Vicky for organizing this, co-organizing with the Malaysian Parliament. She has been very active in this field, and we are going to miss her very much, some of us, when she leaves Malaysia. But I have no doubt that we are going to be in touch, because Namibia, just an example, is one of the countries which don't have the problems we are discussing here, because we already have a 50% representation of women in the ruling party, SWAPO, as well as in parliament. We actually have a zebra list for every, the ruling party is SWAPO. For every man, the first one is a man, the second one, the zebra list, that's what we call it. So for Namibia, I'm always saying that there's a lot that Malaysia can learn. We have learned a lot from Malaysia in capacity building, in education, but on the issue of women empowerment, I think we can work together, together with other countries in Africa. I'm sure you've heard of Rwanda. For Vicky, really, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for the organization and for inviting us as Commonwealth High Commissioners and missions here in Malaysia. For Honorable Pato, I also wanted to agree with you that it's important if we have a women Minister of Home Affairs. In fact, in Namibia, we had one, and so many things changed for the better. We had a Minister of Home Affairs and Immigration. Immediately, the registration of birth was faster, and it was even done online. The granting of passports was so quick. Now, in 1 week, in 1 day, you can get a passport in Namibia, which was not happening before. So I do agree that it's important to have women in those key positions in government. And we want to actually appreciate the rate at which the Pakatan government is working towards ensuring that Malaysia also gets on the map for women empowerment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Right, women in power for sure. The gentleman over there, can you just, yes, right.
My name is Bhim. We are working with Elected Women Leaders Association for last 18 years. There are 2 questions. One is, when women get elected, society feels that they should do the magic. And naturally, we know that corruption is not gender-free. But it's very important that nowadays, women are asking that how to manage with the commission, how to manage with the corruption. So this is one issue which we are facing, how to deal with for value-based politics in valueless context. This is one question, because really we are facing this problem. Corruption, how to deal with it. Secondly, can we create a global pressure, any group which can support this women's governance process all over the world? Thank you.
Support the what all over the world? support.
Can we create a global pressure group which will support this women's leadership political process? I think there is no group which can support this process. So at global level, can we have can we initiate some process like that?
Yeah, the UN Women. Actually, could we have a quick response to that before I call on Hani and unless it's the same question? Could we have a quick response on the question of corruption and whether women, how will women leaders?
Well, I think you shouldn't make it gender specific because corruption is corruption. I can just use the UK example that we introduced a Bribery and Corruption Act. And it applies to all our citizens, whether they are politicians or they're business people, and that drives behavior. And we have had some high-profile cases of people who've fallen foul of our law. And the message there is that you can have the best laws in the world, but if you don't implement them and follow through and enact them, then the laws are useless. And on your point about a sort of global network, yes, there is the UN Women, but we are all here in the main because we are Commonwealth countries. And CP4D and this initiative about advancing women's inclusion advancing inclusion and accountability in democracy in the Commonwealth, events like this and programs that are rolling out in other countries is at least 53 nations trying to do something on this agenda together. So the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, you will see, as you are today, events and programs being rolled out.
Very quickly, because I just realized we were supposed to end at 5:10 or 5:15. Hani?
Hani Tan here. Can I just say, firstly, I'm not invited here in my capacity as any NGO volunteer. I think I'm invited here as a lawyer, so I'm just going to say a few things because my view, I think, is not congruent with Jack's views on sexual harassment and the equality law that we are looking at. So firstly, I want to say I'm very concerned whenever I hear people say that we have no sexual harassment law in Malaysia. That is an incorrect statement. So the Employment Act has been amended so that there is sexual harassment laws in the workplace, and that applies to all employees regardless of your pay. That's first. Secondly, we also have a new tort of sexual harassment, which was actually brought about by the federal court. And that's really quite an amazing piece of judicial activism. So we already have those two. I would say, if anything at all, the gap is probably in the criminal law if women want to take it that far. So I do appreciate what you say, High Commissioner Tridel, when you talked about the issue is not so much with law or not having enough laws, it's actually the implementation. So we have had the code of practice on eradicating sexual harassment in the workplace, I think since around 1999, 2000, something like that, So the issue here is not being implemented by the Human Resources Ministry and by whichever ministry that wants to take the lead. But very interestingly, nobody wants to take the lead. So prior to all this, the Jack Group was actually lobbying for a sexual harassment enactment, which to me I feel is not necessary now. We need the implementation of the code. We need women to know about the tort. Also, we need, we need people in the workplace to actually set up the structures which are already in the Employment Act. That's one. Secondly, it's actually a question to the High Commissioner. I am personally not in favor of a gender equality law. I'm actually more in favor of an Equality Act, much the same as you have in the UK. So perhaps you can share with us the experience in England, how it's like having an Equality Act, because then that takes a whole range of statuses which is unlawful to discriminate people on. How has that worked out? Because with the Equality Act, I believe that your Human Rights Commission is now squished into one, so you don't no longer have like the Race Relations Tribunal and all the rest of it, so you only have an Equality and Human Rights Commission, if I'm not wrong. So maybe can you talk a bit about that? Thank you.
So, but before the High Commissioner responds, can I just have a question from Firdaus, and we'll end there, and then we can have the final words from...
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Firdaus Husni. Just a quick question, and it's earlier at the opening, I think the Honorable Richard Graham mentioned how it's also important to share stories as well as ideas. So this is more of a question along that line. So maybe to both of the speakers, in their line of work, in your line of work, if you can share personal experience of you yourself facing, gender discrimination or gender stereotyping, and how you handle that situation, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so we can end up with the personal stories, but first, Vicky, perhaps you can respond to Hani's question around a general equality law.
Yeah, I mean, it's been transformational because it has forced organizations, employers to look at recruitment policy, for example. So if I think about my own organization, and I'm going to mention subjects that are difficult in Malaysia, equality means respecting every individual regardless of race, religion, gender, sexuality. So if I look at my own organization, when I first joined the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and this shows you how old I am and how long I've worked for the Foreign Office, whilst the policy had just been changed, the first older female colleagues I worked with had to choose marriage or their career. Had they chosen marriage, they would have had to resign, for example. And if you were a married female and you had a trailing spouse, you didn't naturally have the support for that husband to go overseas with you, but men had that privilege. Being lesbian or gay or trans or anything else in between was also banned. So civil servants had to be exclusively straight, which of course is nonsense in the real world. And when I joined the Foreign Office, there wasn't a single female ambassador or high commissioner. But of course, when I look at how my department and actually British employment has changed, now there is a requirement not to discriminate in any way. And that law means if you feel you have been discriminated against, you have recourse. And when employers of any description, whether it is government, parliament, private, public sector, academia, you are scrupulous in being fair, or you should be. I'm not saying everyone has quite learnt best behavior yet. So, having our equal opportunity legislation, equal rights, respecting people in their own right, whoever and whatever they are and how they choose to express themselves, has been transformative. The world did not come to an end. Indeed, I think we are richer for the diversity that we have embraced and actually the potential that everyone of whatever variety offers in the workplace. And that, I think, is truly liberalizing in terms of society and culture. But one of the challenges is it does drive extreme reactions. So make no mistake, there are still people in Britain who think that these are mistakes and who do continue to make life difficult from time to time. So that's what I would say, is that, it has been transformative, it has been positive, and for all those who said that it would be a disaster, they have been proven wrong.
Kasturi would like to respond to Firdaus's personal
Stories. Okay.
And we'll wrap it up with that. Yeah.
Okay. So one of my first few encounters of discrimination here in Parliament was, I mean, with all respect and love for our security officers here, they are excellent guys and women. On official functions where the kings come, you have your auxiliary police and some new faces who come who don't know who's a member of parliament or who's a speaker and who's not. And many times, because I drive myself to parliament, I've always been mistaken as the driver of a male MP. And when I try to attempt to park in an MP's parking, they stop me and they say, "This is for MPs, you know." I say, "Can you see my badge? I'm an MP." And he said, "Oh, sorry, I don't know." But it's always easier if you're a tall, muscular man with sunglasses. You can just drive through any security roadblock. So these are personal experiences that I've encountered. Of course, in the Dewan Rakyat, abuses that are hurled from time to time. I've been called Pondan before. You know, I don't know, that MP could be confused. I'm clearly not. But it was only because I didn't give him way, because it was my flaw. And I said, "I don't have time, it's my flaw," you know. And then he calls me that. And it's the tip of the iceberg. There are so many female MPs who would share so many stories. So these are our stories of discrimination. And the speaker at that time didn't take any action on him. He said, "Okay, enough, just move on to the next topic." I said, "No, he has to apologize and retract." He said, "No, it's okay, you know, maybe let the speaker make the decision because I'm the deputy speaker." And the following day, when the speaker was asked to make a ruling, he said, "I was not sitting here yesterday, so I don't know what happened." And we said, "Yes, but the chair is still there, regardless of who sits. The chair is still there, and you must make a ruling." So there was a lot of pressure from other male MPs that he had to make a ruling on that. So, so these are some of my experiences. You know, apart from just being, you know, you just stand up and speak, and they just call you pendek, and they call you budak sekolah, and, you know, balik lah, you know, those kind of things. So it's very common. But then they were in government at that time. So now that they're in opposition, it's not so bad. But it doesn't mean that it's not happening still. I think YB Merbok may have a story. She was actually heckled by one of the male MPs from the opposition. Was it in the July sitting, I think? They said something quite nasty to her because she was a Muslim woman. Yeah, so we often get talked down that way. Sometimes even by the speaker. I was actually once... you know, I was quite shocked at the way the speaker responded, because there was a time that the Domestic Violence Act, which was supposed to have been tabled in the August sitting, had to be deferred to the end. The amendments of the Domestic Violence Act had to be deferred to the end of the year sitting, the budget sitting. And I was so mad because he actually gave way for another bill that was, you know, tabled by the Islamic Party. So I was so angry that a bill that was out to protect women, to give better protection for women who were victims in an abusive relationship, had to be shelved for some pseudo bill for political gains that was attempted to be tabled by Islamic Party. I was furious. So in that sitting, when I spoke about it, I said that, you know, I felt terkilan that this bill was actually deferred. And he stopped me and he said, "What are you trying to say?" He took it so, I was... upset lah, you know, basically I was upset that this bill, which was important for women, had to be deferred in this house. And the speaker actually took great offense. He stopped me and he said, "What are you trying to say? Do you want to debate or not?" And he asked me that, and I said, "Yes, this is my flaw." And he said, "Well, if you want to debate, then if not, I will stop you and you will have to sit down." And I thought, my God, you know, would he speak like this to another male MP? Right. Yeah, because it was on a woman's issue. So yeah, it has happened, and so we hope that, and of course, you know, we must give credit where it's due to our MPs in the past who had actually amended the standing orders to include the usage of sexist terms as derogatory in the parliament, unparliamentary, no decorum. In the past, sexist was not part of an offense in the standing order, so we have that today. But as my final note, I hope these sort of engagements and dialogues and platforms for interaction, sharing ideas, best practices, good stories, bad stories, experiences will not be a one-off thing. That it would be something, it will be the beginning of many, many good things to come. And it would not be, as in Malay what we say, shock sendiri, that we all feel so happy to come and meet everyone and then, you know, wear your nice suits and take photos and selfies, and that's that. But then work actually starts after this. How are we going to convey this to our constituents? In my back in Batu Kawan, why did I take 2 days off to come here, and what are the issues that we speak about? How to put women's agenda, family agenda, children's agenda, youth's agenda on the national agenda. How do we push for that? Because this is something that I've always called, you know, like the children's agenda must be a part of the national agenda. Women's agenda must be a part of the national agenda. The youth agenda must be a part of the national agenda. You know, how do we push for that? And women cannot be speaking alone. So we need more men to come. Today we have Ledang MP. Are you still here? Oh, poor guy. Yeah, well, at least he stayed, you know, more than half of the day. But yeah, so if this is live, then we need more participation, more people outside to talk about it. Coax your MPs, your male MPs, speak to them, ask them, what are you going to talk about in Parliament in the coming sitting? Are you going to mention anything about women? Because we'd like to know what Parliament is going to give us in return. Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope to see you all soon later at dinner.
Thank you so much, Kasturi and Vicky. I'm afraid I've taken so much of the time. Dinner is at 6:30. Do you have any last words? No. No. Thank you. Because we have dinner at 6:30 and I've taken a lot of time from Shannon, who's going to be wrapping up. But just on the balance, I just wanted to thank you, Hani, for your thoughts around the Sexual Harassment Act. But lest you leave this room wondering whether we should or should not have it, I think it's very important to keep discussing it at the merits and demerits of a Sexual Harassment Act. Please go and check out the Joint Action Group websites, whether it's Women's Aid or Awam, to look at some of the arguments as to why we need a sexual harassment law. Obviously, we need another panel discussion to talk about some of the points that Hani brought up. But I do not want you to leave the room thinking that this is something we've thought through, so do please go and check out the websites, Women's Aid Organization and Awam and so on. But we'll continue talking about it. We should continue debating about it. Thank you very, very, very much. Shannon, the floor is yours. And thank you so much, Vicky and Kasturi. And Kasturi wanted to say something very quickly to say, yes.
I think I speak for all of us here that we wish Your Excellency Vicky all the best. You would be leaving Malaysia to start your new role as the High Commissioner from the UK to Australia in March. So I think we should give a round of applause. And yeah, we thank Your Excellency for your contributions, your services, and your dedication, commitment, and for continuously inspiring us to do better. Because you know, you lay the bricks, and then we walk on it, and then we lay the bricks, and other women walk on it. So thank you so much for inspiring all of us. Thank you.
Day one over. Not over, dinner at 6:30.
Just before Shannon closes, I wanted to just point out one logistics issue. For those tomorrow that will be going straight to the airport, I need to go straight to the airport after we finish. We've organised transportation for you. So please check out of your hotels tomorrow morning, bring your luggage on the bus, leave your luggage here, and then we'll sort out your transport.